Hey everyone! This time we are going to be going over the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons games on the NES. We're going to talk about the two publishers for these games for just a little bit. On the PC there was SSI, and for the NES games there was FCI. I don't know why they have acronyms like that, but hey, why not? There are also three other games that I'm going to mention at the very end for the SNES, the Genesis, and for the Sega CD. So we're going to start off with Strategic Simulations Incorporated, or SSI as they're probably better known. SSI was actually one of my favorite publishers growing up. I know that sounds kind of weird, but they put out a lot of games that I really enjoyed. They put out the game Dark Sun, which was probably the way that I got into really playing Dungeons & Dragons games. I wasn't super into it, but I really loved Dark Sun. And when I found out there was a sequel to it, I went out and got that off of GOG. I remember getting Dark Sun from like this weird blister pack of like 5 random games from Dungeons & Dragons. I could not tell you what the other 4 games were, as I spent most of my time playing the Dark Sun. It was from there that I found out that SSI published a lot of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons games. They did a lot of other like simulation and strategy games, which kind of makes sense because that's sort of their name, but I knew them mostly from Dark Sun and from another game called Imperialism. I didn't find this out until much later, but SSI went defunct in 1994, and they were eventually bought up by Ubisoft, which might explain why we haven't seen too many of their, their original properties around anymore. It was kind of a shame when I found out about that, just because I had so many memories of playing SSI games. But, oh well, it's just kind of the way the industry goes. It wasn't until a lot later that I started, game collecting when I was in high school, and I found out about the games on the NES. And that's when I found out about our other publisher that's going to come in, which is FCI. And FCI is kind of a weird publisher. I mean, they did the Dungeons & Dragons games, but they also did a whole bunch of other weird stuff. On top of doing the Dungeons & Dragons games, FCI also published the Ultima games on the NES, and on the Super Nintendo as well. They also published a few other RPGs, and then for some weird reason, they started publishing the WCW games. I almost want to know why they started doing that, because it just seemed really weird to me that they would, do Might and Magic, do Ultima, do Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and then for some reason decide, hey, let's publish the WCW games. Why not? The first game we're going to be looking at is Dragon Strike, which is kind of an interesting game. It was first released in 1990 on pretty much every computer out there, and then it was ported over to the NES in 1992. This is kind of a strange idea because, at least for the NES, it's a top-down shooter that's a little bit free-roaming, but, not really as free-roaming as it could be. You do change altitudes every once in a while just because you can't really shoot down on the ground to hit some of the enemies, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. There are 3 dragons you can choose from, and they each have their own sort of attack pattern, which is kind of neat. It adds a little bit of variety to the game. Now the PC version is totally different because it's from a first-person perspective, and it has 40 missions to it. The NES only had 14 levels, probably because it was a much smaller cartridge. They couldn't fit everything in there. As far as shooters go, it's not bad, to be honest. There are parts that I don't really like too much, but for the most part, it kind of reminds me of Thunder Force 2 or something like that. Next we get into Hillsfar and Pools of Radiance. Now, Hillsfar I'll kind of describe first. It was developed in 1989 and released 4 years later on the NES in '93, so it was pretty well dated by the time it got to the NES. The game takes place, of course, in a fictional town called Hillsfar, where players, work for one of the many guilds until they retire. It's kind of a weird game, to be perfectly honest. This was called the worst RPG ever made, which I don't really believe. I mean, it could be a lot worse. I mean, it could be way, way worse. But, here we are. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, Ultima's Quest for the Avatar, where it's not really a traditional RPG, and it sort of does some kind of weird things and does some stuff on its own. Now we get to Pool of Radiance. And this is one that I think they actually got right, because it's more of like a traditional Western RPG, which is like a dungeon crawler type game. I hate these because they do this stupid pseudo 3D thing, and there are absolutely no labels to tell you what any of the actual buildings are that you're going in. It can be really, really annoying. At least there are a few like text cues to tell you what's going on. The combat system I absolutely hated. For the most part, I just really got upset because I don't necessarily like this type of game. It might be fun for other people, but for me personally, I prefer more of the Japanese style of RPG. This game was first released in 1988 and was ported to the NES in 1992. I honestly don't know why it took them so long, but, whatever, it's fine. You build your party and you go over to the port city of Flan, which I kind of felt was more like a dessert, but, whatever. The game ultimately ends with your party fighting an ancient dragon eventually, which, sounds about right for a Dungeons & Dragons game. And now we get to Heroes of the Lance, and this goddamn piece of shit of a game. I hated this so much. It's really weird when you have an NES game and you think that the controls don't work, and you're trying to figure out if there's like an extra couple of buttons on the controller that you should be pushing, because the only 4 that you have don't seem to do the things that they should be doing in the game. So let me just run through this stuff really quick so I can stop talking about this waste of a freaking game. It was released in 1988 and ported in 1991. It's based off of the Dragonlance campaign from one of the first novels, I think. This focuses on a group of completely useless heroes who can't goddamn do anything and end up getting killed by a fricking, I'm thinking a goblin, but I don't know. You'll see in a little bit. Anyway, just from playing the game, I don't understand what the hell they were doing with this. I really don't. It makes absolutely no frickin' sense to me. It's a side-scrolling kind of an action RPG with doors that you can't go into, or doors that you can go in, but the controls don't work, or there's some weird thing you have to do in order to get them to work, and then randomly stuff just starts falling on you for no reason. This is in real time, me pressing every frickin' button combination I can to go into this door. I know I can go in the door because the stupid frickin' thing above the N, which is north, is telling me I can go in. But I can't, so I guess I have to fight whatever this is supposed to be, who just keeps shin-kicking me and killing all of my characters. You can duck down at some point, which I thought you should be able to do. I think I was attacking it. I'm pressing the button to attack it, but nothing's happening. I literally went through like 5 other characters in this before I just said screw it, pause the game, and turn the stupid thing off. I hate this game. I don't understand what they were going for. I don't understand why they thought this would be a fun game. Whoever designed this and whoever programmed it, I hope you went on to do something better, because clearly you were learning how not to program games with this one. It is just awful. Like, top to bottom, it is just absolutely frickin' terrible. God, it was just so frickin' stupid and bad. So while they were kind of trying to experiment and figure out what was going to work for a Dungeons & Dragons game, and I think they eventually figured it out with Pool of Radiance, but it just took them a while, they moved on to the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and they came up with some really great games. Eye of the Beholder was a really good port, and came out for the Super Nintendo, and there's also a Sega CD version. And the Sega CD version requires you to have the backup, so you need this nice little cartridge, which is like a proto memory card. It's kind of a cool little thing that they threw in there. Eye of the Beholder was developed in 1991 and ported over to the SNES and the Sega CD in 1994. This was the first in a trilogy of games, but we only really got the first one on the home console as far as I could tell. It's a pretty standard RPG. It's, a dungeon crawler just like Pool of Radiance. It was fine. I don't really know why Capcom published it instead of FCI, but it's just kind of a weird thing. I'm not really too sure what happened with that one. And then there was Warriors of the Eternal Sun. Now this is kind of an interesting one because this was a Sega Genesis exclusive, and it doesn't look like any of the other ones, and it really doesn't look like it was ever released on the PC as far as I can tell. So this game was released in 1992, and the story is actually pretty interesting. Your party and the kingdom that you're in and you're trying to defend are all transported to a zoo that was created by Ka the Preserver. And you have to fight some evil called the Burrower, which, okay, sure. It's just kind of a nice shift from the formula of RPGs that were going on in the 80s and 90s, where you didn't really see this sort of thing in a fantasy setting. I'm not really sure why SSI or FCI weren't really involved in this game. It's just kind of something weird. I didn't really think I was going to see that, but this one definitely was able to stand out from the crowd. So thank you guys for watching. That was kind of our little adventure through, the Dungeons & Dragons games. It's kind of sad what happened to SSI. They just sort of faded away. I'm not really sure why that happened to them, but it happens to a lot of publishers. Like I said, FCI is still going. I'm not really sure exactly what they're up to. I couldn't really find a lot of information on them post like 2000 or so. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everybody.